Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 88 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. I'm one half of your co-host with Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. My name is Sean. I'm here with Sam. Sam, we are recording like two episodes almost 2 days apart. This is pretty quick for us.
It is. We had a few circumstances, personal circumstances that brought us here, but it has maybe heightened our familiarity with the content, we'll say. Getting a lot of House of the Dragon in as we move toward the end of season 2. I don't know about you, Sean, but I really enjoyed episode 7 of House of the Dragon season 2. What did you think overall before we get into the details?
This one was good. It wasn't full action like I'm kind of looking for at this point. I think I've said a couple times now, like, how much more plot building towards a war can we have? And I said that right before this episode, and I'm going to say it again right after this episode. How many more episodes?
Plot
building can we have?
They're still moving pieces on the chessboard, which maybe we can talk about at the end of this episode. But is this a slow show or is it a slow burn? Is its pace a downside? I don't know. We'll get to that. But let's talk specifically about this episode before we talk about the season so far as a whole. So it's titled The Red Sowing. Rhaenyra confronts Adam of Hull, Seasmoke's rider, who pledges fealty to her. Dismayed at being removed from the small council, Alicent retreats to the Kingswood. Larys pushes Grand Maester Orwyle to accelerate Aegon's recovery. While departing the Eyrie with the young princes, Rhaena leaves to find the wild dragon. Mysaria tells Rhaenyra to search for Targaryen dragon seeds, bastards with Valyrian blood, in King's Landing as potential dragon riders. Now the Lord Paramount, Oscar Tully, offers Daemon allegiance, but denounces his nefarious behavior. He thinks that he demands that Daemon mete out justice for allowing war atrocities. Daemon then executes Willem Blackwood for slaughtering the Brackens. Daemon has another vision of Viserys, who asks if he truly wants the crown and its burden. Jace challenges Rhaenyra, arguing that bastard dragon riders could challenge the Targaryens' power and threaten the succession due to his own illegitimate birth. At Rhaenyra's command, Alinda and Alan bring the dragon seeds to Dragonstone, Hugh and Ulf among them. Vermithor kills many until Hugh claims him. Meanwhile, Ulf becomes Silverwing's rider and flies over King's Landing. Aemond pursues him on Vhagar, but nearing Dragonstone, he quickly retreats upon seeing Rhaenyra with Syrax, Vermithor, and Silverwing. That's the episode. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with the claiming of the dragons.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I had a realization. They're claimed in two very distinct ways. Ulf shows strength in basically sacrificing himself, Hugh shows strength in basically sacrificing himself to save one of the other dragon seeds, a young woman, and then he distracts Vermithor, and Vermithor takes to that show of strength. But Ulf is the first one I want to talk about, because Ulf, I had the realization last night that maybe he wasn't attacked because he stepped on the egg sac, and maybe he smelled like a dragon or something akin to that. And then, because that scene when he approaches Silverwing, he first steps on the egg sac and gets like goo covered on his boot. Then he falls into the water, which I would assume is covered in dragon pee at this point, and dragon stank. And Silverwing slowly like comes up to him and kind of sniffs him a little bit, and then like goes back on her legs and kind of just looks at him like she's giving in to Ulf a little bit. But I think he's just super goddamn lucky that all of these things went right for him, because he doesn't show strength at all. He shows a huge sign of weakness by like basically running away from Silverwing as she's waking up. So I don't know. That's my theory. I don't know if it's correct or not.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. I noticed it was noticeable that they showed very clearly that he stepped in the egg sac and there was still the goo on him, and you'd think that would smell like Silverwing or like a different dragon. I'm assuming those are Silverwing's eggs. And then I also noticed the fact that, he fell in that water, which was like, yeah, they're on an island. It could be water. It could also probably just be dragon pee. So that could be the explanation. The other thing that I would add to it, and I don't think these are mutually exclusive theories. It's got something to do with the temperament of the dragon. You can see like Vermithor is aggressive and almost cruel in the way that if to the extent that a dragon can be cruel, Vermithor was demonstrating it with the burning and the eating and the tossing of the people. Whereas Silverwing is a little bit more laid back, a little bit more. She didn't even show much aggression, right? Because she was like nudging him with her nose to like get back, right? And
Mhm.
like she didn't even begin to breathe fire. Like, remember how when Aemond tamed Vagar opened its mouth and you saw the fire starting to brew? You didn't get any of that. You didn't get anything that indicated that Silverwing was going to get aggressive. So maybe it's somewhat of their personalities.
Yeah,
Could be.
very well could be. Yeah. But what was your take on Hugh, Ulf? I kind of joked before the episode that the last episode was entitled Small Folk. This one should have been titled Fuck the Small Folk because
Small small folk on
Rhaenyra,
fire.
yeah, Rhaenyra didn't even advise them to be confident. She kind of just let them go. And then once Vermithor went on the offensive, she told her guards basically to keep all of them out on the platform until something happened. So that's pretty dark.
And didn't those guards all get incinerated too?
They all died too, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like it. So I said before we started recording that this is my favorite episode of House of the Dragon so far, and maybe one of the better episodes in the HBO Game of Thrones universe since like the first half of the original Game of Thrones series. That doesn't mean it didn't have its shortcomings, and I think one of those shortcomings was the somewhat accelerated nature of the whole dragon seeds, where just to back up before we get specifically to Hugh, things move very quickly with them coming up with this idea, the people going to King's Landing, spreading this word clandestinely, but it seems like word spreads very quickly to the point where it just becomes just a piece of gossip that people spread around. And you'd think that the Iron Throne would have picked up on it. And then you have like a seemingly large number of people leaving all at the same time, rather conspicuously in the same, like from the same city where only a couple episodes ago, they very noticeably closed the gates and prevented anybody from leaving. So it did seem, and maybe there was a deleted scene that showed how they got away with this, and Alinda and Myseria's contacts within the Gold Cloaks like open a gate that allows people to escape. Whatever, it's fine. It's not a big deal. It's not earth shattering, but it was just part of there's like one aspect of how this was accelerated. And then I liked the fact that the Dragon Keepers object to this entire idea and kind of quit in protest as a en masse, because it makes sense. Like I'm sure those Dragon Keepers are the closest to old Valyria as the Targaryens are, and I'm sure like they've probably served House Targaryen for centuries, and this would be a rather significant step away from tradition. So I like that conflict. But then, yeah, like Rhaenyra herself tamed a dragon, has witnessed other Targaryens tame dragons, and then they had the one example of the failed taming of Sea Smoke, but it seems to have been a little haphazard. Of like, I'm not gonna tell you, I'm not gonna teach any of you High Valyrian, even though he decided to teach High Valyrian to Alan after he claimed Sea Smoke. So there's still some value in that. And then I'm not even gonna have you go one at a time. We're gonna put all of you out here on this confined space, and you're gonna stand behind the one person who's attempting to tame the dragon. So if, like exactly what happened, that person gets hit with fire, there's going to be a shit ton of collateral damage. So and and the thing is, I don't know if it's consistent with Rhaenyra's character to be that callous to all these people, especially if she thinks within their ranks are folks who can actually be incredibly valuable to her cause. So it seems like it's a little lazy, and it might have just been done for spectacle, because like it would be so boring and also unbelievable to have like dozens of people one at a time go get burned and eaten. So compromises had to be made. Now, that's the big spiel. Anything you want to react to there before we talk about Hugh specifically?
No, just it does seem out of character for her to just be like, guards force them to stay out there and all die, especially
Yeah.
once she sees Vermithor really start to go at them there. I did like how they kind of showed us two different styles of claiming dragons. I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I liked seeing more of the dragon caves. I thought that was cool to
Mm-hmm.
see. We see Hugh on the ground when he claims Vermithor, and then we see Ulf kind of escape through some tunnels and then kind of find his way through the caves as well. So it was just cool to see. We've always seen up to this point them calling forth dragons and dragons walking up to that platform, but seeing other areas of this subterranean dragon cave was pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree. I like, and they established already that you have this like this peninsula of rock. Not it's not a bridge, just this big platform that juts out into this cavern. And they already established the fact that there are like multiple levels to it. But then you saw how that kind of came into the fore in the Hugh scene where he distracts Vermithor so that this other girl can run and like go through a doorway and get to safety. And they show like that doorway was in the base of this big platform that we've seen now multiple times. So I think they did a good job in, yeah, building on the complexity of the dragon area here. Now, to Hugh's taming in particular, I think what's interesting about Hugh is the journey his character has taken over the course of the season, where you saw him first as a blacksmith who seemed to have been a little down on his luck. He needed some cash and he thought he was going to get relief. He had the sick daughter, he had this concerned wife. And we've seen a lot of the wife, looking for food and being unsuccessful, talking about trying to leave. Unfortunately, his daughter died off screen, which I'm glad they didn't show that. I think I'm glad that they didn't show that. Just the fact that it happened is enough, and maybe it's easier for me to kind of empathize or to sympathize rather.
I think it was more powerful this way
Yeah, yeah,
because when the scene began, I still thought she was alive. And then they
yes,
dropped that
yes,
bomb of like, I don't want to lose you too. And then you're like, oh shit, she
yeah.
died. Like,
And
god damn.
did he have a line of like, I couldn't save our daughter, but like I need to do something, and like
Mm-hmm.
this dragon is like the something that he can. He sees it as I need to feed my family. I need to like protect my wife. Maybe also it's this anger. And I think what we saw was at his final scene, his final thing that he did was venting his anger about his situation in a way to distract Vermithor. But the feelings underneath it were all of his frustration with the fact he couldn't save his daughter, with his situation in general.
And I think also it was kind of a moment of, I couldn't save my daughter. Maybe I can save her.
Yes. Oh, totally.
So,
Yeah.
and then he takes that moment as, I'm willing to die to ensure that this individual lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that self sacrifice and show of strength is what puts him over the top with Vermithor.
Yeah. All right. So before we move on about Hugh, and I mean Hugh is he's a character in the books. I'm not going to spoil anything for you, but
Please.
I this is a lot more depth than we have in the books for Hugh, which I appreciate. Now, he mentions that he is the daughter of a Targaryen who worked in a pleasure house. Did that come through when you watched it?
His mom?
Yeah, his mom is a true born pure Targaryen.
Yes.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
So
Because he says
her
something along the lines of, my mom always said that I looked like the sons of Jacaerys or something in
I,
reference to Viserys and Daemon.
yeah, I think he said the line, I looked like I looked like her brother's children,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Viserys and Daemon.
To
And
be
so
his cousins, right?
so yeah, he would be cousins with those two, which means that, well, so Daemon and Viserys are the sons of Balon, who was never a king but was hand of the king. He was the son of Jaehaerys, the old king who we see at the beginning of the season 1 at the Great Council. And Jaehaerys had many children, very few of whom, well, let's see, he did not have a good relationship with any of his daughters, including this in the books. Her name is Sarah Targaryen, who I think eventually like runs away and goes and works at a pleasure house of her own volition. And even at some point down the road, she was invited to come and contest the throne at a great council, and she declined. So this is and it's not established in the books that Hugh is her child at all. In the books, Hugh is just you know a bastard offshoot. He doesn't even know who his parentage is, or what generation in the Targaryen family he comes from. So what this does, I think it well establishes the fear that Jace has about the succession potentially being questioned. Because here you have somebody they were the child of a known Targaryen who I don't, this is what I don't know. I don't know if technically Sarah is older than Balon, and theoretically, if her children would come first in any sort of succession. Like there would have to be a lot of things to fall into place there, right? But you could make the argument like, I am the child of an older child of the king, therefore I should come first. I can ride a dragon. I look like a Targaryen, so I could see how this could feed into Jace's paranoia.
No, I thought he was complaining for no reason.
Jace?
Because I think the whole point of this is your mom standing as heir to the throne is based off of the succession.
Mm-hmm.
And if she has chosen you as the heir, then that's what you're fighting for currently. Like the other team is fighting for firstborn male and all of that specific lineage. So I don't know. I thought it was all for naught. And then how can you even prove the parentage of these individuals? And you
Well, I
can
think
prove Jace's that he's definitely Rhaenyra's child. I
so.
mean,
That's
he even mentions he knows he's a strong. So he brought that up in this episode, but I don't know, man. Like it seemed like in the moment you're losing. So at this point, I don't think it really matters. Figure that out down the road. Like this isn't the time to complain about this. Figure it out later.
Yeah, I think the issue is you can't take somebody's dragon back, right? Like once you give somebody Vermithor, they've got Vermithor, and if they decide to say, "Hey, you know what? My dragon's bigger. You're a bastard anyway," and it doesn't matter if people accept the fact that you're not, or if people believe the lie that you're not, because I will just go to war with you, and I have a bigger dragon. I think that's the challenge, right? It's not like it's a gamble. We'll say that much because does have a good line. I think there's a good exchange between Rhaenyra and Massaria where they're talking about this idea, and Rhaenyra's like, the highborn have fealty and honor and all of that, and then Massaria makes the very good point of like, well, your own family stole your throne and you're currently fighting them. So like what does honor matter to them? And that might be like the winning argument. But the point is like that doesn't mean the small folk won't or couldn't also act dishonorably once they get a taste of power.
Yeah, I'm in the camp of you need them. So let's figure it out later. Yeah.
It already worked, right? Like you already have basically deterred Vagar. So I mean, they definitely have the advantage as things are now. The final thing I'll say about Hugh, just real quick, this is the second time that Hugh's wife has mentioned going to a town called Tumbleton. That's a very significant location, and I'm assuming it's what will be season 3 of House of the Dragon. So things are going to come to a head in Tumbleton, and stuff could get crazy. Anything else?
No, I want to move on to Big Dick Oscar Tully.
Yeah, this is the part of the episode that I was like, I was smiling and I clapped involuntarily. I clapped. I have to admit. So hats off to Oscar Tully, and good job on the director and that actor and whoever cast that actor to get like a very good child actor who can hold his own in a very critical scene.
it's interesting to see the character development and
Mhm.
Damon's past actions coming back to haunt him. In particular, he treats this kid like shit in like episode 2 of this season.
Yeah, go kill your granddad.
Yeah, kill your grandfather, take your rightful spot as Lord of the Riverlands, and then do what I say. And when he says he's not willing to kill his grandfather, he basically says, then you're no use to me. And he like leaves him in the little council chambers of in Harrenhal. Damon then fucks everything else up in the Riverlands. And when this kid finally gets that position of power, he makes Damon look like a fool in front of all of the River Lords. And it's, and that's, and we talked a little bit before. Damon, I think part of it is his, and he takes it when the kid says the things in front of him. He takes it for two reasons. The first reason you mentioned before the show, his character development. All of the things he's seeing in Harrenhal, all of the hallucinations are changing him as a character, as a person. But it's also, I think he realizes he needs the River Lords.
Mm-hmm.
He needs the army. He can't do this without this kid. The kid basically just dick slaps him in front of everybody. And I think he also takes it because he knows this is what the kid needs to do to convince all of the River Lords to follow him.
Yep.
Because he even said right before the scene happens that they're not going to listen to me. I'm just a kid. And then he kind of says, I'll do my best. So it's a good scene of succumbing to the verbal abuse of this child.
Mm-hmm.
And he even goes as far as the first individual to kind of lay down the sword and claim to be a vassal for Oscar Tully is, oh God, what's their names? Not
Blackwoods.
the Blackwoods, yeah. And to get all the rest of the River Lords on their side, on his side, Oscar Tully orders him to death and sentences him to death, and then tells Damon to execute the sentence. And Damon, it looks like he pauses for a moment, but then,
He
yeah,
swings that Valyrian steel sword. Yeah.
he knows he needs an army, so he's willing to do what it takes. And I feel bad for the Blackwoods in this instant because, well, no,
Yeah,
Damon
they were
even
they
said
were
he
they were
wanted,
dicks.
yeah, Damon even said he wanted the other ones because they were willing to stand up to him and were better fighters. So no, the Blackwoods were just got played hard in this, and I do kind of feel bad for them, but
Yeah, I think it's funny because in the fandom, I think a lot of people like the Blackwoods. The Brackens are supposed to be the bad guys in
mhm.
in a lot of stuff, and people really love the character in the Game of Thrones, the Lord of the Lord Tytos Blackwood in the Game of Thrones timeline because he has a like a long cloak made out of raven feathers.
Mm,
And like that's the only detail that people know about him for most of the entire series. But it's like, oh, that cloak is so cool. Like,
I
I think
want
there's,
one.
yeah, yeah. Did you pick up on any sort of like begrudging respect between Damon and like? I think Damon like, oh, I've just got played. I like this kid.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I felt like a huge part of that too because there's the moment where I can't remember his first name, but the strong guy who's kind of overseeing
Oh,
Harrenhal at the moment,
Sir Simon.
Sir Simon. When Oscar Tully is going off, Sir Simon kind of looks at Damon like,
Yeah, yeah,
"Oh
yeah,
God, please don't kill him."
yeah,
And then Damon kind of looks back at him, but the look he gives Simon is like kind of like a respectful, like, and I think it plays two ways. It plays, I'm going to kill this kid, but it also plays, okay, the ball's on this kid for
yeah.
saying this in front of everybody. But there's so many layers to this scene.
It's it's like
It's
it's like Hugh and Vermithor.
yeah,
You got to show strength to the big dangerous thing, and it will
to the
respect you.
dragon. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we got.
Yeah. I think that was my favorite scene out of all of them
Oh, for sure,
was,
it was
was
fantastic.
Hugh, and everything I've been seeing on social media has been Oscar Tully stole episode 7.
For
And
sure.
he was definitely the bright spot of this episode.
Well, you can. So the funny thing with the Tullys, right, is that they're not the oldest house. They're not the biggest house. They're not the richest house, the strongest house in the Riverlands. They just happen to be the first house that bent the knee to to Aegon the Conqueror and rebelled against the Ironborn that were basically colonizing the Riverlands. And so they were rewarded with the Lord Paramountship. And in the main series, again, you've got a somewhat similar situation with the the Lord, and that in the Game of Thrones timeline, it's Hoster Tully is like bedridden and sick and delirious for most of the first three books, and then he dies in the third book before the Red Wedding. And in this timeline, you have a similar thing for the majority of the first two seasons where they're kind of out of action. But now you get this like you get this badass Tully kid, and you can see how the Tullys, again, they don't have the money or the men or the history, but they can wield respect and they can act honorably, which is exactly what Oscar Tully did. He perfectly navigated the path of I'm gonna stick up for most of my vassals. I'm gonna punish the vassal that needs to be punished. I'm gonna maintain my oath of fealty to Rhaenyra. I am going to do that through Daemon, despite the fact that I don't like him, and I'm going to make it very clear that I don't like him because that is what one, I think that's actually how he feels, and two, it's exactly what his lords needed him to say in that moment. So it was phenomenal. So yeah, he stole the show or the episode, and mad respect for Oscar Tully. Anything else? We had a couple other smaller scenes in this episode.
I think the only other scene that I'm dying to talk about is Aegon's rehab.
Oh yeah,
I know when you get a knee, a hip replacement, they usually get you walking like later that day. But when your knee is like compound fracture and it looks like there's a 1 inch gap that hasn't been like sewn shut, and you're telling somebody to walk on that, that seems a little too soon. But we get the scene we had was the Maester was walking Aegon around to the point where he starts screaming, crying, falls to the ground. And our Lord of Whispers, Mr. Clubfoot, walks in and kind of yells at the Maester a little bit,
it
telling
was it
him
was such
it
a
was a
good.
weird scene. Yeah.
I love that delivery because I think he goes because he's like banging on the door, and they're like, "No, not yet, not yet, not yet." And then Aegon has fallen over, and then Larys comes in, and he looks at the Maester. He's like, "You really ought not do that alone," right? Like, kind of implying if he dies during one of these things, it's gonna look like an assassination. But then we also later on through dialogue between just the two of them that Larys is also pushing Orwyle to speed up his recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's saying one thing in front of the king and then another thing to the maester out of earshot.
Yeah, and his rationale for wanting to speed it up is we might need to be moving soon. So I think he's realizing that King's Landing might not be as secure
Yeah.
of a place, because right before this we've had the uprising, we've
Mm-hmm.
had rumors of multiple dragons being claimed.
We had an assassination attempt that
Yep.
already killed one member of the royal family. So you mentioned the other dragon being claimed because that happened in a scene at the beginning of the episode where Ironrod, Lord, what's his name? I can't remember his name, but the Master of Laws, like I heard a whisper that Seasmoke has had a new dragon, and then Larys kind of interrogates him about the source of it. He dismisses it, but you seem to be saying that maybe Larys is kind of buying into it. And it's like, okay, if that's true, then we need to prepare to leave.
Mm-hmm. That's where I'm leaning personally.
Yeah, I think that's a good read.
Because even after he receives that information and he kind of puts it down a little bit, it's hearsay. It's, oh, how did you gather this information? And then he responds by saying, oh, my squire heard it from this guy who heard it, who's a
Yeah,
fisherman, whose
yeah.
whose captain heard it. So I think he gives him a look after he just says it's hearsay, after the guy leaves. And he has a moment where he looks down at Aemond. And I think he's putting it together in that moment of oh shit, this we might be kind of screwed here if all we have is Vagar.
I love the backdrop to that conversation is Aemond sending the two surviving Kingsguard who instigated the riot. He's sending them to the wall, which is great because I just kept waiting for Aemond to whip his sword out and chop their heads off in a parallel to what Daemon would do with
Mm-hmm.
Willem Blackwood. But he did he didn't he sent them to the wall. But that was a fun backdrop for this scene. Yeah, it was another thing that just contributed to me really liking this episode. Like they just set things up really well. Fun parallels between the different portions of the episode. It's not perfect because I do think the dragon seed stuff was a little accelerated, but we are, like we said earlier, and maybe this is a good time to pick that conversation up. Moving more chess pieces, right? We have two more dragons now. We have an army in the Riverlands that Daemon will control. Last episode, we had the army of the Westerlands showing up, and then I think maybe it's at the end of this episode. There's another small council meeting. Oh, and we should say too, Aemon's small council is getting smaller by the day. He's sending people on missions. He's dismissing people. He named a new hand, Otto Hightower, who hasn't
We
showed
still
up
haven't
yet.
seen.
Haven't seen this season. But then they mentioned that that army, the Hightower army, is on the march and there's fighting along the way. But the other dragon that belongs to the Green faction has taken flight, and that's Caesarea, ridden by the youngest son of Alicent Hightower, Daeron Targaryen. And so again, another chess piece. So is this a slow burn that we're building toward a more significant conflict, especially in season 3, probably in the final episode of this season? But it seems like season 3 is going to be conflict and war heavy. Is it a slow burn that's enjoyable and worthwhile, or is it too slow and it's detrimental to your enjoyment of the show?
I think we'll see how they handle season 3.
Okay,
Because
so
at
you're
this,
willing.
I'm willing to wait. At this point, I feel like there's times where I feel like it's detrimental, and then there's times where I don't. And it kind of ebbs and flows with the episodes that come out. So this episode was slow, but it was a great episode. And I was willing to overlook it. The last
Mhm.
two episodes, I thought it was too slow. And especially with, like we talked in episode 86 or 87 about, I guess 86 and 87, Damon's being in Harrenhal and how that's just dragging on way too long. So there's times where it works and there's times where it doesn't. Damon, I don't think hallucinated in this episode.
He did. He hallucinated the Viserys conversation
Oh, that's right.
about the crown,
The
which
crown. Yeah.
I think that's like the culmination of his journey.
Yeah. Hopefully
Um,
that's it.
with him like realizing that either he doesn't want the crown or it's not worth it, or like finally recognizing his brother and his brother's worth. Real quick, I thought they did a fantastic job talking about parallels. There's in the as Aegon is getting back into bed and Laris comes in, you can see how his face is burned and his ears burned off and his like lost some hair, and he really looks like his dad in that scene
Mm-hmm.
where he's obviously his dad. It was advanced age and leprosy, whatever else. So they got there in different they got to that point in different ways, but it was really really good, fun parallel,
Yeah.
fun juxtaposition.
So you mentioned all of the green factions that are on the move.
Mm-hmm.
Now we also have an army of Greybeard Starks who have been marching south since like episode 1 of
Mm-hmm.
season 2. You have the twins opening their gates for the Starks to march south.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Riverlands now seemingly coalesced underneath Daemon's rule. You have dragons being claimed. And one would think, and you also have the ships. So you have the Valarian fleet that is also potentially at odds with the free cities.
Yeah, the
Because the
what is it?
last episode,
The
Aemon
triarchy,
talked
right?
about, yeah, getting the triarchy, paying the pirates to basically fight the Valarian fleet. So there is a lot of movement.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lannister army. We didn't even talk about the Lannister army
Oh
moving on
yeah,
Harrenhal. So that's another one.
Yeah,
So
you have
there's a
these
lot. I think we're going to get a pretty massive conflict at the end of this season. And then season 3, I think, is going to be conflict heavy.
fire and blood, so to speak.
Yeah.
The words of House Targaryen. So you said you're willing to wait until we actually get season 3 to say whether or not season 2 was worth it. So I think at the very least, season 2 has kept you interested. It is you have these highlights kind of peppered throughout the season, right? You had the battle at Rook's Rest. You had the taming of Vermithor, which I thought was a pretty cool scene. The near assassination attempt on Rhaenyra. I almost forgot about that. Like, so you had these smaller either fights or action sequences that have done enough, but then it's also punctuated with just these really good conversations. The really good just people talking in rooms. And I think and I it seems like we're getting our spectacle sprinkled throughout in moderate sized doses where it does. You disagree with that?
I wholeheartedly disagree with that. Like,
Okay.
until Rook's Rest, I thought the show was boring this season. And that was episode 4.
The halfway through the episode, the season.
Yeah. So for me, like, the
Yeah.
shows this season started slow as shit. And they were losing me. And I thought the Rook's Rest episode brought some more. And I mean, like, those scenes, that's for me, like, you bring up Rhaenyra's potential assassination. And like, going back to that episode, I thought it was just poorly handled.
Yeah.
And it didn't make any sense. I thought they, like, the decisions they made that led to that assassination attempt, I hated how they handled it. So even though it was a cool fight scene, I had complaints going up to it. So I don't know.
No, you're not wrong. To be quite fair, I kind of forgot about how things were probably too slow in the first few
Mhm.
episodes. And we talked about Harrenhal and how it could have been maybe a bottle episode.
And even the Blackwoods and Dracklands, Bracklands,
Brackens.
Brackens. Even that whole thing, we don't even see that fight. We just see the after effect of the burning
Hmm.
mill. So like, the episode is entitled "The Burning Mill," and
We just see
okay,
bodies on the
yeah,
ground in the
you
water
tell
here.
us, you show us the beginning of two young individuals from each house like getting into a verbal fight, and then you show us the after effect of the battle. But I don't know, it was, yeah, to me the first half of the season was really slow, and I will admit that it has picked up since Rook's Rest. But I disagree with you on the quality of the first half of the season.
Well, to be fair, I'm not even really. I was I was trying to come up with examples of spectacle being sprinkled throughout, and I mentioned the Rhaenyra assassination attempt, but as soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, "But wait a second, that wasn't really spectacle. That's just a fight," and it was confusing. We spent a decent amount of time talking about that. I think it being confusing again was kind of the point of it. Like, you don't know which is which, and neither do they, and they both die, and Rhaenyra lives. So we're basically one step forward, two steps back. But yeah, I think the from Rook's Rest on, to the extent that the first half of the season was slow, it has more than been made up for with this episode being kind of the highlight, the standout so far.
I think it's just been an average season.
Okay, that's fine.
If you have
It, it may it
if you have
it
a
may be
sub if you have a sub average first half and an above average second half, that
yeah.
that
No,
hits
you're you're
average for
you're,
me.
you're
So
totally right. It averages out, but we have a recency bias, so
mhm.
we're inclined to remember more about the episode that we just watched, which was really good, than
Yeah.
the first three or four, which were maybe not so good. And then of that, we remember Rook's Rest, which was I'm still thinking about that guy getting melted by dragon blood.
Mhm. Yeah, looking forward to the last couple episodes of House of the Dragon. We'll see how
All
it
right,
goes.
do you have predictions for episode 8 before we wrap up?
Nope. I still think Damon dies, but I don't think it happens this season. I think it's going to happen at the either midway point or end of season 3. I think Damon dies.
Okay. Well, folks, you heard it here.
And I'm predicting still. I'm pretty sure I predicted that it was in a fight against Aemond and Vagar,
You did. Yeah, you
and I still think that is going to be the case because
well,
that would be a pretty BA, pretty much the same character.
yeah, no,
Aemond and Daemon fighting each other to the death and they both die. I think that would be very, very entertaining. It's like Step Brothers when they hit each other with the bat and the shovel at the same time and knock each other out.
yeah,
Do you remember that?
it's just like that.
It's going to be just like that, except on dragons.
It's on dragons with Valyrian steel.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they both die instead of get knocked out.
Yeah. Okay, well, that prediction still stands. We have one episode left in season 2 House of Dragon. Unfortunately, due to travel schedules and vacation timing, that episode will not come out the week following its premiere. We apologize for that, but I'm taking some family time and will not be able to record. But I think we'll have something for you all that we're release.
Hoping maybe this Friday we'll find time to record a small episode about the new Rings of Power trailer that just came out. So yeah, look for that Friday or this weekend. Otherwise, we'll see you in like a week and a half, 2 weeks for episode 7 of House of the Dragon.
Episode 8.
8. Apologies.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye.